When performing an exercise in the gym, over the course of a set, you will hit a point where you can no longer complete another rep. This is known as failure. And the reason that most people think you hit failure is due to your muscles simply running out of energy. However, I am here to tell you that that is not the case. Hitting failure is due to a neurological phenomenon. It's a brain safety mechanism, and understanding how that safety mechanism works allows us to leverage the system in order to achieve better gains faster, more efficiently. My name is Amir Barber. I'm a chemical engineer and a self-proclaimed fitness nerd. And today we're going to be dissecting the topic of task failure and how we can use it to our advantage to maximize muscle growth. Let's jump right in. First of all, let's define what failure is, and more specifically, what task failure is. And it's actually a very simple operational definition. It's when you cannot complete the movement under the rules that you've defined for the task. All right, that's a lot of words. Let's bring this back down to earth for a biceps curl. We can all understand biceps curls very well. All right, so let's say I define my biceps curl as very strict form. So my upper arm is going to stay in place. None of my upper body is going to be swinging or anything. And I'm going from 0 degrees of elbow flexion to roughly 120 degrees of elbow flexion, right? I've defined the rules for this task now. Now, as soon as I hit the point in the set where I cannot complete another rep using those rules, that's failure. So if I swing, that's failure according to how I've defined it. Or if I can only get to right here, that's failure by how I've defined it. Now, you can define failure however you like. So if you're saying that cheat curls are the way for you, or cheat curls, and this is what you consider perfect form or perfect task, all right, then as soon as you can no longer do this anymore, then that's failure. So failure is not a static thing, it's dependent on how you define the task that you're performing. And the reason we hit failure is because we reach this neurological threshold known as your maximum tolerable perception of effort. This is essentially the maximum amount of pain or unpleasant sensations that your brain can handle before it decides to downregulate how much of your muscle fibers you are using to do this movement. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive and set the table for us. Now, what actually causes muscular contractions? Well, it all begins in the brain. Your brain generates an electrical signal known as your central motor command. And the size of this central motor command is very closely correlated with the level of effort that you are trying to apply to the movement pattern. For example, lifting up this battery requires a very small central motor command, and lifting an 80-pound dumbbell from right here would require a very large level of central motor command. Now, when your brain generates this central motor command, it also makes a copy signal that's the same size. And this copy signal is known as your corollary discharge, and it gets sent to the effort perception part of your brain. So if I were to lift this light battery, I'd generate a small central motor command and a small corollary discharge. And my brain would perceive that effort as, okay, this is pretty easy to lift up this battery. And then if I pick up the 80-pound dumbbell, I would generate a large central motor command and also a large corollary discharge. The corollary discharge would go to the effort perception part of my brain and say, hey, this is difficult. And if I were just to pick this thing up and hold it for as long as I could, eventually I would no longer be able to do so because I'd reached my maximum tolerable perception of effort. And just a side note, the corollary discharge is just one of the sensations that can contribute to hitting your total perception of effort. And when you hit this max threshold, that's when you hit failure. So how do we actually know that this is a brain thing and not your muscles just giving out? Well, we can point to the voluntary activation deficit, which is a very well-documented phenomenon. So what researchers would do is they would put subjects in a dynamometer, so they essentially strap them into a leg extension machine, and they say, hey, push on this pad as hard as you can and hold it. So let's say initially they were able to generate 100 pounds of force. They actually measure in torque, but we'll use pounds. Eventually they're going to reach a point where they can only produce 90, then 80, then 70, and so on and so forth. So when they reach that point, that failure point essentially, where they're starting to produce less and less force, the researchers will actually apply an electrical current to the muscle. And that force production will then shoot back up and maybe even beyond what it was before. So this clearly demonstrates that it's the brain or something happening before the muscle in which that electrical signal is not getting sent to the muscle to stimulate the fiber. Because if we supply the electrical signal, then we can produce more force. So this is very strong evidence that failure is a central nervous system limitation and not a local one, not local to the muscle. Now, aside from the corollary discharge, what are other things that contribute to our perceived effort levels? Well, we can go down the list, but really it's anything that's painful or unpleasant or effortful. Okay, so cardiovascular strain being one of them. If you're out of breath and breathing very heavily, that contributes to your perceived effort. Also, metabolite accumulation, which is the fancy way for saying burning sensations within your muscles. Those burning sensations contribute to the effort. They are painful. And then the last one would be stability or bracing demands. So if you are doing a single-legged Bosu ball squat, you're gonna have a lot of effort associated with just staying upright and staying stable. So to be very reductionist, we have a good sensation of effort, which is the corollary discharge. And the reason that's good is because a big corollary discharge means a big central motor command, which means a lot of muscle fibers activated. Now, these other ones can be more or less thought of as bad. They are not contributing to increasing how many muscle fibers we can activate. In fact, they are counterproductive to that. So my favorite analogy to use to visualize this is the effort cup. Now, this was my iced coffee cup. Now it's for sure not the iced coffee cup, and it's the effort cup. So we want to think about this cup as our capacity for perception of effort. So we fill this cup up with different liquids of effort perception. So for example, let's say we fill it up halfway with the corollary discharge, which again is like the good effort, and then we start filling it up with these negative sensations. Like, let's say if you were out of breath from your previous set, we're getting up there. And then let's say you're also very out of breath and it's unstable, it's overflowing, and then that is failure. We've reached our maximum tolerable perception of effort. There's only so much that you can handle. Now, in a perfect world, we'd want almost this entire cup to just be from the corollary discharge. Again, because that means a very high degree of motor unit recruitment, which is good for growth. Okay, but in practice, in a dynamic set where we're performing a set, it gets a lot more complicated than just that cup, but it's a good way to visualize it. So the goal for that cup is to fill it up mostly with corollary discharge rather than those other sensations. And just to make this example magical, here's a little bonus tip. You could actually make the size of this cup bigger due to motivational factors. So things like positive self-talk and hyping yourself up, listening to a high BPM music, or working out with a friend that's pushing you can increase the size of your cup and increase your capacity for effort, which will be great for muscle growth because you can take your sets further. And this is actually very well documented in the literature. Forms of positive self-talk and motivating music increase your strength measurably. Fun little tidbit to throw in there, but let's actually talk about how this effort perception would develop over the course of a strength training set. Now, to illustrate this point, I'm going to compare two different types of sets. First thing we're going to talk about is a light load set taken to failure. We'll call it a 20 rep max. And then we'll talk about a 5 rep max, so a heavy load set taken to failure. So let's discuss the 20 rep max set. Now, if you're choosing a weight where you can do 20 reps, initially those first several reps, you're not gonna have a very high level of effort. You're not pushing with all your might because you could do it 20 times. All right, so what that means during this cup is that we have a fairly low level of central motor command, which means let's just call it half of our muscle fibers are activated. Now, as those muscle fibers fatigue and as we climb up to the 10, 15 rep range, we have to continue to increase the central motor command so that we can switch on the higher threshold muscle fibers. Now, as you have a longer set, there's also more time for burning sensations, metabolite accumulation, and breathlessness to fill up the cup. So during this light load set to failure, we have a significant chunk of that perception of effort coming from these negative sensations that don't have anything to do with how many muscle fibers we switch on. So essentially, the cup gets full before we reach our maximum level of motor unit recruitment. Now let's talk about the heavy load set to failure, where we're doing a 5 rep max. So initially off the bat, if you're doing just a 5 rep max, you have to apply all your effort off of rep number 1. So initially, assuming we're going into this set well rested without any burning sensations in our muscle, that motor unit recruitment, that central motor command, that corollary discharge is very high. So we've already achieved a higher degree of motor unit recruitment than we did on that other set taken to failure, simply because we're applying a ton of effort right off the bat before that breathlessness and those burning sensations actually kick in. Now, as the set continues, we start filling our cup to the tippy top with those other negative sensations. And as soon as we get to this point, we have to actually start decreasing motor unit recruitment in order to make space for those negative sensations. And what happens is when we decrease our motor unit recruitment, we decrease the amount of muscle that's involved with the movement, we can no longer perform that movement, so that's why you hit failure. So there's the same reason for why you hit failure in both the light load and the heavy load set. It's because you reached that maximum tolerable perception of effort, but in the light load set, you filled your cup up more with those negative, unproductive sensations as compared to this heavier load set where more of it was motor unit recruitment and the corollary discharge. So this is the perfect time to start rolling into the practical takeaways of this discussion, because all of this theory means nothing if you can't actually use it to your advantage in a gym environment. So tip number 1, favor heavy loads over lighter loads. Like we just discussed, the lighter loads have a lot more of those interference effortful sensations as compared to the heavier loads. And what that means is that you'll have less activated muscle fiber with lighter loads versus heavier load strength training. So there's a good argument to be made for heavier load strength training being better for growth in the 5 to 10 rep range. Tip number 2, take longer rest periods. Too many people go into their next set with their cups already half full of breathlessness and burning sensations because they didn't take a long enough rest period. So when you take longer rest periods, it allows time for that cup to drain and empty so that when you do that next set, you have the opportunity to have high degrees of motor unit recruitment. Number 3 is prioritize stable movements. For example, if you're doing a single leg squat on a Bosu ball, you are going to start the set, even if it's the first set of your workout, with your cup half full due to all the instability and coordination demands. So your cup's essentially filled with junk right off the bat. So prioritize more stable movement patterns. Machines are generally the most stable, but don't take that as me bashing on free weights. I also think if you're very coordinated at free weight movement patterns, it's not that much of a problem. But again, going to the other end of the spectrum, don't do stuff on Bosu balls. Tip number 4, boost your arousal in a good way, not the weird way. All right, so you can actually increase the size of the cup if you increase your motivation. So things like training with a partner that's gonna push you, that's awesome. Positive self-talk and hyping yourself up before your set, that's great too. And also listening to good music can also increase the size of the cup. So that's takeaway number 4. Now there are other practical takeaways, such as staying away from excessive junk volume that's just gonna artificially raise your heart rate with low degrees of motor unit recruitment. All right, but we won't get into the volume debate for now. We're gonna stay in this little corner. To wrap up this whole video, failure is not caused by your muscles giving out. It's about your brain reaching its limit. And what your job is, if you're training yourself, is to manage what fills this effort cup and try making it the most productive effort cup possible. So minimizing these other negative sensations and maximizing the one that we care about, the corollary discharge. So my friends, train smart and fill your cup up with purpose, and your results will reflect that. And if you like these type of videos, please subscribe, drop a comment, and share it with a friend maybe. Maybe your friend needs to see this too. So I hope this helps, and peace out.